Hello friends, and happy St. David's Day. I managed to get these pictures of these lovely daffodils on my walk last night. They came just on time. So I just wanted to cap out the month, the end of February, with an update on what I got done. So you can see here some Republican Romans that I finished. Now some of these you've seen from last video, but I just wanted to do a kind of sort of show-off video, I guess, with the little turntable thingy. These are 15mm Old Glory 15s. I've tried to use the method that my friend Kevin prescribed from the Krause collection, since he's such a master of 15mm. He recommended that I try the Citadel, not speed paints, contrast colors, especially for the skin, which I did. With mixed results. If you look at those calf muscles there, they're a bit dark. I found that I have to heavily overbrush with white in order to get it to come out correctly. Otherwise, the skin tone ends up being incredibly dark. It looks like it's oversaturated with Agrax Earthshade, basically. But happy with the way these turned out. So that's 5 stands of skirmishing Velites and 3 stands of Principes, which are the second line, so they're the chainmail clad pilum wielding legionaries for the Republican Romans. Color wise, I've opted for a kind of white linen-y uniform tunic color, and then reds for the shields. For the allied legions, I'll probably do something a little bit different just to differentiate them. They're very chuffed with how they came out. Here's some detail shots of the Velites. Again, I rattled through these at pace. I didn't spend too much time on them. And they came out pretty nicely, I think. The figures are quite lovely. There's lots of like deep detail on them, so you can see there's lovely creases on their clothing that really takes the soft wash, that soft tone wash that Kevin recommends, and then a little bit of a highlight here and there really elevates the figure. So quite happy with how these came out. These are 10 figures. I have another 6 to 14 to go, so another 7 stands. I'll get those done as and when. Again, they don't take too long to paint, so I'm not in a massive rush with them. But good to have and to get those done. The 15mm stuff is really just great for getting through fast. Right, and then these just a detail shot of the Principes. Again, the red shields, I've try to add a bit of definition after the wash with just some careful highlights and adding a bit of like metal here and there just to break things up. The linen I'm quite pleased with. Again, the soft wash tends to pull in the nice deep recesses, which gives a relatively like good high contrast offset. The skin was probably my biggest disappointment. I'm still learning how to use the contrast paints. I honestly have found that if I paint something like a solid undercoat of white, it works really well. If I try to be clever with zenithal and have like a black, grey, white, like dry brushed up, it tends to just come out quite muddy. So you'll see there the calves are quite like variable in their tone. I don't really mind so much because we don't tend to ogle the calves too much, at least I don't. But yeah, I mean the figures look great. I think at a kind of like 6 foot distance or 3 foot distance, they look fantastic, very nicely detailed. The Principes are the chainmail clad figures in the second line. The Hastati I've already done with the pectoral armor. I've showed those off before. I've got some Triarii that I'm working on right now. Those will be a little bit more fiddly on account of the fact that the spears are not integrated like these Pila are. So I have to glue them on, and the spears they provide you with are a bit naff really. They not really, they're just pieces of rod. But anyway, we'll get to that when we get to that, but I have got like the first stand or 2 basically finished for the Triarii. Again, they paint up quick. So I'd like to get my little core Roman Legion, quote unquote, done. That'll be a nice breathing point there with that project. But I'm quite happy with how they came out. And again, thanks to Kevin for all his advice. Then we get on to the Legionaries. You saw these last week. So the bulk of the figures on the stand actually were painted in about 2002, 2003. The Foundry figures sculpted by the Perrys. The Optio at the front left is also a Perry figure, but I got him recently from my friend Dave. So this is more of like a rebase job. An absolute nightmare, I will say, because the shields are not molded on the figures. So I've had to re-glue them on, and when they pop off inevitably, because they're only held on with super glue, I'm replacing the super glue with epoxy for a stronger bond. But really happy with how these guys came out, and I was actually able to field them this week in a game, which made me very, very, very happy. My troops took to the field for the first time since 2007, which is a long time for figures to wait in a box. Yep, so looking good, I think, especially at distance, you know. So this is a battery of Scorpios. So like, you don't generally get to use these too much. I think in ADLG you can actually attach them to legions as like a support unit, like a support thing, which means that these would basically become like a marker that sits behind the main stand, which is fine with me. I didn't get to use it this week in our game because we didn't have any ballistas or Scorpios or whatever. But figures again by Wargames Foundry, sculpted by the Perry twins. I added in the Optio on the left there with the crested helmet, and the sort of engineering observer chap in the foreground here, just from spares that I had, just to add interest to the bases. Otherwise they're quite sparse. Again, the actual Scorpios and figures were painted probably 20 years ago at this point, so nice way to refresh the figures by just giving them a new basing scheme, you know, just to lift them up a bit and make them a bit more kind of vibrant and alive. From a rules perspective, I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I think with ADLG you can field them as artillery, but you can also field them as integrated into units, I think. We played a game of Armati this week, and we didn't field them, so that was a bit of a bummer, really. But happy with how they came out. I think the tufts and the grass looks really good. It breaks up the monotony and the rather large base, gives it just a little bit of interest. From a painting style standpoint, I just used the kind of Kevin Dallimore style three phase, so shade, medium tone, highlight. The exception is with armor, where I generally have just used like a bolt gun metal color and then like washed it with black, and then in some cases I will have dry brushed over it, but probably not here, just judging by visually. But yeah, I'm really, really happy with how the figures have come out. Looking forward to getting the Romans on the table more now that I've got enough of them based up to actually be able to field a force. Again, of course, the rebasing continues, so you'll probably see some of that in March as I carry on that general effort. And then, as I mentioned, we played a game this week. The game was Armati. It was Trajanic Romans against Gauls, a little bit anachronistic, but it was basically an excuse to put my troops on the table. You won't really see them in these pictures I'm showing you because I commanded the opposite wing. But there's the initial disposition of forces. There were about 10 players in total, about 5 or 6 aside. Roman plan was to basically hold flank on the left and then crush the center. And there you can see my troops on the left flank. I had 2 legions and 2 cavalry squadrons, and then there's a little tree clump you can't quite see there. There's some light infantry there with javelins who are hoping to kind of hold that creek line that you saw in the first shot. And in the distance you can see the first line of troops that are going to bore into the Gauls, and then a second reserve which will be coming up behind, with the option of swinging out to left and right, commanded by a sub-general, Eric. And there's another shot of the line. The troops look fantastic. These are my friend Dave's figures, really nicely done army. These are the Steve Sala Wargames Foundry figures, and he's actually replaced every single pylum in the army with piano wire that is beaten into the shape of a pylum head. So he doesn't do things by halves. He's doing the same thing with his Marian army that he's working on at the moment. So he's a bit of a lunatic, but that's what we love about him. And then this is the left flank of what I'm facing. So you can see everything to the left of the creek. There was some Hellenistic cavalry which were brought in error instead of Gallic cavalry, and then some war bands and some light cavalry on the far flank there. And their plan is to sort of engulf us on the left wing and then hopefully sweep behind the Romans. Armati, however, makes these troops highly, highly, highly unwieldy. They really struggle to maneuver, so that's a problem that the Gauls will face. And you can see them there, the cavalry's tearing down the creek, hoping to get around us. And I've moved my legions there to try to block them. Armati has a kind of zone of control type thing, so you can basically lock units down and force him to just move forward and no wheeling. So I'm hoping to kind of catch this cavalry at the creek bed there, where my opponent won't have much option in terms of places to maneuver. And there you can see my light infantry in the woods. And this is a few turns later. You can see my infantry's actually charged the cavalry because I was straddling that creek and I just got to the other side. His cavalry stopped about an inch in front of mine. We won initiative and I was able to actually charge the cavalry. My cavalry, he's got some cavalry that slipped by my cavalry screen over there, as you can see. My worry was that he would now harass the rear of the Roman line. But my bigger concern was to try to deal with the warband that was slowly sweeping its way. And then this is the fight at the creek. You can see that the cavalry on the bottom right has surprisingly turned around with a view to charging me. And then I've actually managed to destroy the cavalry that I engaged earlier in the game. And then in the far right hand corner you can see Eric, the sub-general who was commanding the reserve, is effectively blocking that Gallic warband there. They're refusing to commit over the river because they'll be at a disadvantage. And then you can see on the top there the Roman line is just carving through the Gauls. I mean, they don't have much of a chance. We lost a few legions, but really, when it's a straight up fight in depth, the Romans just maul their way straight through the Gallic warbands, and you can just see the disintegration. There were, I think, 2 lines of in echelon of Gauls, and they're just getting minced up by the Roman assault. And then this is the opposite end of the line. You can see there the Romans having slightly less success on the far right of the picture, but certainly the more towards the center, it's just been a bloodbath, and it's basically all been going Rome's way, with a few exceptions. So yeah, this is the thing with these barbarian armies. They are kind of like glass cannons, right? You only really have a chance of breaking the Romans with either luck or a first turn impetus breakthrough. Things are a bit messy on the far right hand side. You can actually see some of my troops there in the distance, some cavalry, but for the most part the figures are largely Dave's. As I say, he has an enormous army. They just allowed me to put some of my stuff on the table, really, because none of them had ever seen it. As I said, these figures haven't been used since 2007, so long time of inactivity. And this is kind of, as the game winds down, we're just butchering through these warbands, and as we do that, the break point of the Gallic army gets closer and closer. Armati's not my favourite rule set. I like to play it with the guys because that's the rules that they're familiar with, and I'm prepared to make that sacrifice in that regard. It's an opposed dice combat system, and I'm not a huge fan of that. I say that. I don't know. Sometimes it feels a bit kind of like very luck dependent, right? If I roll a 6 and somebody rolls a 1, it's relatively evident what's going to happen. And there aren't too many modifiers to artificially, drive things to a more logical conclusion. But one of the things I want to point out here is if you look at these little fatigue markers behind every unit, the Romans have been fighting for so long now that basically they're all fatigued. So they're fighting with like a -1 or whatever it is. Like they're just exhausted from just hacking their way through the Gauls. And these are relatively fresh Gallic warbands. And Eric has managed to hold up that entire block of warband at that creek. I think honestly, the Gallic player should have just committed to the charge. You throw in the stuff on the left and you hope for the best, and you just have to commit to the attack. I don't think there's really any other option. They didn't do that, and so I think that sort of timidity is ultimately what cost them on the left flank, because we were just able to kind of lock them down for the duration of the game. And there's a kind of wacky situation here where my cavalry are engaged with the warband, and then my second cavalry unit have actually about face to face the threat behind them. Again, I think the smart money would have been for the 2 cavalry units to just keep going to try to catch the Romans at the rear or something, because they did sneak by me pretty early. They just then spent like 3 turns turning around and bimbling around and not really getting much done. Same with the light cavalry. They kind of hung around and were super ineffective. So glorious victory, great day at the office for the Romans. They just basically won on breakpoint. And that's it. I just want to thank you all for watching and look forward to the next one. And all the chat that usually ensues. Thank you and take care.